Abomination! What have you given birth to, you wretched woman? I should have known better than to marry you. The king's voice thundered through the palace halls, his face twisted in shock and disgust. The heavy storm outside matched the rage in his heart. Queen Adana, drenched in sweat and weak from labor, turned to behold the sight that had shaken the entire kingdom. Two babies. A hush fell over the room. The midwife froze. The palace guard stiffened. Even the chief priest, who had been praying for a safe delivery, took a step back. It was unthinkable, an abomination, a curse. Twin births had long been forbidden in the kingdom of Umidibia. From the time of their ancestors, it was believed that twins were a sign of doom, a warning that evil would befall the land. Any time twins were born, they were thrown into the evil forest, a dark and cursed place where spirits roamed and no man ever returned. But this birth was even worse. The royal bloodline was never supposed to produce twins. It was a sacred rule the king could only father one child. Once the firstborn arrived, he could never have another. If he failed to produce an heir, the crown would pass to another family. And yet, here they were. The first child was strong, his skin dark and smooth, his cries bold like the roar of a lion. The second child was weaker, smaller, his skin slightly paler than his brother's, and his eyes blue like the ocean. No one in Umidibia had such eyes. It was unnatural. The wind howled through the palace windows, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and the distant growls of thunder. Rain pounded against the thatched roof, drumming like a war song of the gods. Inside the grand birthing chamber, the cries of Queen Adana echoed against the mud brick walls, raw with pain and desperation. She had labored for hours, her body slick with sweat, her breath ragged. The midwives surrounded her, their hands steady but their eyes filled with fear. They had all prayed for an easy birth, for the arrival of a strong heir who would secure the kingdom's future. But what emerged that night was something else entirely. Two babies. The queen barely had time to register what had happened before she heard the king's voice, a voice that had once whispered promises of love, but now thundered with horror. Abomination! What have you given birth to, you wretched woman? I should have known better than to marry you. King Obiora stood at the doorway, his dark eyes filled with a fury that sent a chill through the room. His royal robes clung to his damp skin, the deep crimson of his garment resembling fresh blood. He did not move closer, he did not have to, the weight of his presence was enough to silence the room. Queen Adana, weak but instinctively protective, pulled the newborns closer to her chest. Her heart pounded, not from exhaustion but from terror. She had known this day would come, known the risk of carrying a child, known the ancient laws that bound them all, but never, not in her worst nightmares, had she imagined birthing two. The midwives shrank back. The palace guards, standing by the door, stiffened, their hands resting on the hilts of their spears. Even the chief priest, who had been leading the prayers, stepped away, muttering words of cleansing under his breath. Twin births were forbidden in Umidibia. It was said that long ago, a great disaster had befallen the land after twins were born into the royal family. Rivers dried up, farms withered, plague spread through the kingdom, sparing neither the rich nor the poor. The elders had declared it a divine punishment, a warning from the gods. Since then, every set of twins born in Umidibia had been thrown into the evil forest before they could bring ruin upon the land. But no one had ever dared to imagine a scenario like this. The royal bloodline was sacred. The king could only father one child. It was an unbreakable rule. The gods would never allow two to exist. And yet here they were. The firstborn was strong, his cries filling the chamber with the fierce determination of a warrior. His skin was dark and smooth, his tiny fists clenched, as if ready to fight the world. The second was smaller, frailer. His skin, though still dark, held an unnatural paleness, and his eyes. The room whispered in horror. They were blue. No one in Umidibia had such eyes, the color of the ocean, of the unknown, of something not meant to exist within their land. King Obiora's fists clenched. He knew what had to be done. He knew the law. The gods would curse him if he disobeyed. His people would revolt. But then why did his heart hesitate? Queen Adana's fingers tightened around her children, her eyes burning with unshed tears. She was not a fool. She knew the fate that awaited them. She turned her gaze to her husband, her voice breaking. Please, my king, he is our son. They are our sons. Do not do this. But King Obiora's face was stone. Take one away. His voice was colder than the night air. Throw him into the forest before the gods curse us all. A strangled cry tore from Queen Adana's throat. She clutched the weaker twin tighter, as if her grip alone could defy fate. No, please, I beg you. But it was no use. The guards hesitated. They were warriors, not executioners. But they feared the king's wrath more than the cries of an infant. Two of them stepped forward, their hands shaking as they pried the baby from his mother's grasp. His tiny fingers curled, grasping at the air, reaching for the mother who could no longer hold him. Queen Adana's screams tore through the palace as the guards carried her child away, their footsteps fading into the storm. The evil forest was a cursed place, a place where spirits roamed, where shadows whispered, where the dead never truly rested. No one who entered ever returned. The guards moved quickly, their torches flickering in the rain. The twisted branches loomed over them like skeletal fingers, the wind carrying the wails of unseen creatures. They did not speak. They did not look back. When they reached the heart of the forest, they placed the infant on a bed of damp leaves. The child did not cry. He simply stared up at the sky, his strange blue eyes unblinking, as if searching for something beyond the reach of men. One of the guards hesitated, his hands trembled. We are condemning an innocent life. His voice was barely a whisper. The other swallowed hard. It is the will of the gods. We must leave before we are cursed too. The first guard lingered for only a moment before turning away. As they disappeared into the darkness, silence fell, and then a presence stirred. The forest was dark and filled with whispers. Strange shadows moved between the trees, and the wind howled like unseen spirits calling out. But deep in the heart of this forbidden place, an old man stood over a tiny baby. His name was Okoko, the last great wizard of Umidibia. Many years ago, the people of the kingdom had forgotten him, believing magic was dangerous, but Okoko did not care. He lived alone in the forest, surrounded by ancient knowledge, waiting for a sign from the gods. And that sign had finally come. He bent down and picked up the tiny baby, who was barely breathing. His small hands were cold, his blue eyes half closed. The wizard pressed a hand to the child's chest, feeling the weak heartbeat. You have the spirit of a warrior, Okoko whispered. But the world has already turned against you. He carried the baby back to his hidden home, a small hut covered in glowing symbols. Inside, herbs and strange potions lined the walls. A fire crackled in the corner, its light casting long shadows. The wizard placed the baby on a soft mat and fed him warm milk mixed with healing herbs. As the baby drank, his strength slowly returned. His blue eyes stared up at Okoko, full of questions he could not yet ask. You are no curse, little one, the old man murmured. You are destiny itself. And so, the boy was saved. The wizard named the baby Gabs, and under his care, the child grew strong and clever. By the time he was 5, Gabs could run through the forest without making a sound. By 10, he could control the wind and call fire with just a whisper. By 15, he was faster than a leopard, stronger than a grown man, and wiser than his years. But no matter how much he learned, something inside him felt empty. Grandfather Okoko, he asked one evening, sitting by the fire, where do I come from? The wizard sighed, stirring a pot of herbs. You are from a place that did not want you, he said. A kingdom that feared what it did not understand. Gabs frowned. But why? What did I do wrong? You were born a twin, Okoko said, and in Umidibia, that is seen as a curse. Gabs felt anger rise in his chest. So they left me to die. Yes, Okoko said, but destiny had other plans. Gabs stared into the fire, his heart pounding. He had a brother, a family, a home he had never seen. And deep inside, he knew that one day he would return. From the day Ikenga was born, his life was molded by the harsh expectations of the kingdom. His father, King Abasi, was a mighty ruler, respected by all the surrounding lands. And as his firstborn son, Ikenga's future was set long before he could even understand it. He was not merely a child. He was the kingdom's hope, the future king, and the embodiment of strength. As a boy, Ikenga's days were filled with lessons in the art of combat. While other children played in the fields, he was taught to wield a sword. His small hands gripped the hilt of a practiced sword, the steel too heavy for his tender age, but he never faltered. Strength is not given, Ikenga, his father would say with a firm tone. It is earned. And a king must always be strong, for his people will only follow those who lead by strength. By the time Ikenga reached the age of 7, his training intensified. He spent hours each day practicing with the kingdom's finest soldiers. They taught him how to fight with a spear, how to parry and strike, and how to defend against even the most deadly of attacks. He was faster than the other boys, faster than most men and stronger than anyone expected. But while his body grew stronger, his heart grew heavier. There was a hollow space within him, a feeling he could not explain. He had no friends, only fellow warriors who saw him as a rival rather than a companion. He longed for something beyond the brutal training, something that would fill the emptiness inside him. At the age of 10, Ikenga was crowned the kingdom's greatest warrior after he defeated 3 of the best fighters in single combat. The crowd cheered, chanting his name, but Ikenga felt no joy in their praise. He stood tall, his face impassive, but inside a storm raged. Why do I fight? He asked himself. What am I fighting for? King Abasi watched from the throne, proud of his son's prowess. He had raised Ikenga to be a weapon, a tool of war. But was this truly what the boy wanted? Abasi pushed the thought aside. There was no time for doubts. The kingdom needed strength, and Ikenga was the strongest. As the years passed, Ikenga's skill only grew. By the age of 15, he was a legend, a warrior unlike any other in Umidibia. But despite all his achievements, his heart remained torn. Every night, strange dreams filled his mind. He saw a boy in the darkness, calling his name. The boy's eyes were like fire, burning with intensity. And the boy whispered, "Come find me, Ikenga, we are brothers." Ikenga would wake up with a sense of loss, a longing for something he could not grasp. But he ignored the dreams, for there was no time for distractions. Far from the borders of Umidibia, in a kingdom known as Yuga, a dark power was rising. King Oyal, a ruthless warlord with an iron grip on his people, had begun his conquest to expand his reign. His army was vast, and his power was unmatched. He ruled through fear, terrorizing neighboring kingdoms and demanding tribute from those who bowed to his will. King Oya was not like the rulers of Umidibia, who relied on wisdom and strength. Oya was a tyrant, a man driven by his own greed and hunger for power. He was a magician of the darkest arts, a man who had made a pact with spirits of the underworld to gain unnatural strength. His eyes were like the abyss, hollow and empty, and his heart was cold as stone. The first sign of Oya's rise came when the villages of Yuga were bathed in blood. His soldiers, dressed in black armor and armed with vicious weapons, swept across the land, slaughtering anyone who opposed them. They struck without warning, burning villages to the ground, leaving nothing but ashes in their wake. At first, the people of Umidibia believed that their strong army could hold off any invaders. But as Oya's army grew, so did his power. His magic was unlike anything they had ever seen, and his warriors fought with an unholy fury. A month before Oya's army reached Umidibia's borders, King Abasi summoned his council. His face was grim as he looked around the room, his brow furrowed with concern. "King Oya is no ordinary foe," he said, his voice filled with a rare sense of fear. "He does not fight with just strength. He uses dark magic, the kind we have not seen in centuries. His warriors feel no pain, his beasts are monstrous. We are facing a force the likes of which we cannot defeat with our army alone." The council murmured in fear. "What should we do, Your Majesty?" one of the elders asked. "We will send our best soldiers," King Abasi said. "Ikenga will lead them. He is the strongest warrior in the kingdom, and his courage is unmatched." Ikenga stood tall, his face filled with determination. His father had always believed in him, but for the first time, Ikenga felt a flicker of doubt. Would he be able to protect his people? Would he be able to face the terror that was King Oya? "I will fight, father," Ikenga said, his voice steady. "But we must not underestimate our enemy. King Oya will not fall easily." The king nodded. "Prepare for battle. We cannot wait any longer." But even as the preparations were made, Ikenga's dreams continued. The boy from the forest gaps was always there, his eyes burning with an intensity that both frightened and intrigued Ikenga. "Who are you?" Ikenga whispered into the night. "Why do you haunt my dreams?" And as the army marched toward the border, Ikenga could not shake the feeling that his destiny was leading him down a path he could not control. When the day of battle arrived, the air was thick with tension. The soldiers of Umedibia stood ready, their armor glinting in the sun. Ikenga stood at the front, his spear raised, his eyes focused on the horizon. In the distance, the ground trembled as King Oya's army advanced. They were like a dark wave, their armor black as night, their faces hidden behind masks. The sky seemed to darken as the warlord's forces approached, and Ikenga could feel the weight of his responsibility. "We must fight with everything we have," Ikenga shouted to his men. "The fate of our kingdom is in our hands." And so, the battle began. The clash of steel rang through the air as the two armies collided. Ikenga fought with all his might, his spear cutting down enemies left and right. But no matter how many he defeated, more soldiers seemed to rise. It was then that Ikenga saw him, King Oya, standing in the midst of his army, his eyes glowing with dark power. He was no ordinary man, his body radiated an unnatural energy, and he wielded a sword that crackled with dark magic. "I am not afraid of you," Ikenga shouted, charging toward him. But before Ikenga could strike, Oya raised his hand, and a bolt of dark energy struck him in the chest. Ikenga fell to the ground, his body burning with pain. "You are weak, Prince of Umedibia," Oya sneered. "Your strength means nothing against the power of the dark spirits." The battlefield was a nightmare. The warriors of Umedibia fought bravely, but King Oya's army was too powerful. His men moved like demons, cutting down soldiers without mercy. Ikenga fought with everything he had, his spear struck like lightning, his sword like a raging storm. But even he could not stop what was coming, for King Oya had a secret weapon. The enemy king raised his hands, and a terrible force filled the air. Shadows swirled, and suddenly, Ikenga's body froze. His strength drained from him as if stolen by unseen hands, his vision blurred, and then darkness. When Ikenga woke, he was no longer himself. King Oya had taken his mind, twisted his soul, turned him into something terrible. Ikenga was now a monster warrior who felt no pain, no love, no memory of his past. He led King Oya's armies, destroying everything in his path. The kingdom of Umedibia fell into despair. Villages burned, families were torn apart, the people whispered one name in fear: Ikenga, the cursed prince. And then, just when all hope was lost, Gabs returned. The sky darkened, the air crackled with unseen energy. Gabs had seen the kingdom in his visions, the flames, the bloodshed, the suffering. He had not known why he was drawn to this place, but now, standing at the gates of Umedibia, he understood. He was born for this moment. The villagers stared at him in shock. His blue eyes marked him as different, as unnatural. But when he raised his hands and called upon the power of the ancestors, they knew he was their only hope. Lightning split the sky as Gabs faced his brother. "Ikenga," he called, his voice firm but full of sorrow. "Brother, remember who you are." But Ikenga did not remember. He charged forward, his sword flashing like fire. They fought, two brothers, torn apart by fate, bound by blood yet separated by destiny. Gabs fought not to kill, but to save. He summoned the spirits of the ancestors, calling upon the magic of the land, the air, the water. And then, with one final burst of energy, he struck. Ikenga collapsed. The dark magic shattered. For the first time in years, his eyes were clear. He looked at Gabs, his twin, his blood, and in that moment, he remembered. King Oya, seeing his greatest weapon lost, fled into the shadows, and the people of Umedibia, once doomed, now rejoiced. The lost twin had returned. The cursed ones had become legends.